But it can be a really tough process to go through, and so what I'm going to go over tonight are ideas of how to make it an easier process so that you're really getting a result, but it's not really hard on your body. Because that's what most people will talk about if they say, well, I avoided all food for a week, I didn't eat anything, and I was miserable, and I didn't have any energy. That's not a real effective way to cleanse, and that's the most common way that people will do it, or they'll say that they drank this really odd concoction of juices, and the thing is that cleansing is a very energy dependent process. It takes a lot of energy to accomplish, and so you need to fuel the body appropriately so that you can get a good response and have it be effective through so that you can survive and participate in the world while you're cleansing. And that's one of the things that we're going to go over. So we'll see. I've got all my notes, of course, on here. And I promise I can use some form of technology. So when you think about this, we're going to go through a lot of different pieces of information. But the first one we're going to go over is why we have this issue. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that because most people are pretty aware. In today's society, we're exposed to a lot of different things constantly, and our body has to deal with every aspect of that. And so there's a lot going on. We're going to talk about that problem. We're going to talk about the process that the body goes through, how we're going to change that, and strategies to effectively do it. So really, as you go through this, there's three major systems that are involved in cleansing at all times. Your digestive system is the kind of the bearer of most of it. Your digestive system has to do a lot of work in order to properly cleanse. And so one of the things you want to pay attention to is that if your gut isn't working effectively, say you have a lot of food allergies, your body isn't processing food well, cleansing doesn't happen very easily for you. And so sometimes we need to address the digestive system before we can really effectively cleanse. And so that's one thing that we'll talk a little bit about that as we get into the more information on cleansing. Your respiratory system. You have to breathe in order to cleanse, which obviously we need to breathe for a lot of different reasons. But you want to pay attention to your breathing. That's one thing that you can do to basically cleanse your body on a daily basis. Is take several times a day, take 8 to 10 deep breaths, in through the nose, out through the mouth. Pay attention to that. Most people don't do that. So you want to pay attention to your breathing, and you want to pay attention to your skin. Because your skin is the other system of the body that really has to work to get toxins out. And so pay attention to what not only you're putting into your body, what you're putting into your digestive system, but also what are you putting on your body? Are you putting a lot of chemicals on your skin? Look at the quality of what you're putting, basically the environment that you're creating for your body. My remote doesn't work either. That's just fun. So, but one of the things that we've really found in the last several years is that we're exposed to all kinds of chemicals constantly. And so one of the things, this is just some basic information that I gather, but it's pretty incredible. Since World War II, between 75,000 to 80,000 new synthetic chemicals have been released into the environment. Isn't that incredible? You think about it, and just we're driving around in this environment, or we're walking around in this environment. Less than half have been tested for potential toxicity to adult humans. So you think about we're not testing most of these chemical compounds on adults. If you think of a child's body, how is their body handling it and processing all of this? Over 4 billion pounds of pesticides are used annually in the U.S. So that's about 8 pounds for every man, woman, and child. It's a lot. Current laws allow for 350 different pesticides to be used in the food that we eat. So if you've ever heard me talk before, I always go into organic food, why we choose organic food. It's obviously more expensive, we know that. But in terms of, if you think of that, there's over 350 different pesticides that they say are okay for us. That's a lot if you think of if that's what you're eating and consuming on a daily basis. Current law allows for, I just went through that one, but the average home contains 3 to 10 gallons of hazardous materials, and 400 synthetic chemicals can be found in the average human body. So, part of the reason we have an issue here. So pay attention, if you think about it, the food that you're eating, the air that you're breathing, what you're being exposed to, what you're allowing yourself to come into contact with on a daily basis. So this is always something that I'm really interested in, and I spend a little bit of time looking at this, but drugs are assumed to be toxic and must be proven safe before they can be marketed. Well, we have in parentheses by the FDA standards, because they have probably different standards than what I would think would be okay. So that's you think of what's being put onto the market. There's no single regulatory agency that oversees industrial chemicals to ensure their safety. So the difference with that is that industrial chemicals are presumed safe until they're proven to be hazardous. So most things are just put onto the market and not tested, and then if they think that there's a problem, then we take them off of the market. But a lot of things aren't reported. If you think of how much energy it takes, and people are so busy on a daily basis, how much energy it takes to try to get hold of the right person so you can report something, most people aren't going to take the time or the energy to do it. And so a lot of these things are happening consistently, but they're not really talked about. So when we think about those hazardous chemicals, a lot of them are actually made in pharmaceutical companies, which I find to be fascinating. Any toxicity testing that is done typically involves individual compounds in highly controlled settings. So what that means is that we're just testing one type of a chemical and seeing how that's reacting in a specific, really controlled environment. How is that reacting when it's around 5 million other things that are in your average household or in your average company, or with someone that's just cleaning? They're just cleaning and they're using all these different solvents and they're being exposed to this. So very little post-release safety monitoring actually happens. So they're just not looking at it. It's something that's really being overlooked within our country. So that goes from everything to all of these chemicals that we're being bombarded with, but it also, you think of just what we found out about BPA in the last couple of years. And one of the things that we're really going to go into is that your liver is what has to process all of that. So whether it just be you're driving behind someone and they have their car's producing a lot of fumes and you're breathing that in, your body has to process that, and specifically the liver. And so if you're combining that with, you're putting really toxic nail polish on your nails, and you're slathering all of these lotions on your body, and you've got maybe you're eating food that's really highly processed, every single one of those things your liver has to deal with. And so our liver is kind of a sad little organ, but we're going to talk about how we can support that more effectively. So this is just a slide that shows, I don't know if you guys can see this, but it talks about the synergistic effects of toxins. What that means is that if we just think of the simple thing as cigarette smoking, which is pretty accepted in today's society, we understand that causes a really serious issue for us. But cigarette smoking increases the risk of lung cancer by 10 times. So when we combine that, or if you think of asbestos exposure, which so many Americans, especially older Americans, were exposed to in the past, that increased the risk of cancer by 5 times. Smoking plus asbestos increases the risk of cancer by 55 times. So if you think of all these things that we're being exposed to, it triples our chances of having toxicity within our body if you're combining all of these different things that we're exposed to, whether it be our food source, our air source, what we're breathing, what we're putting on our skin, what we're exposed to at work, what we're cleaning with. All of those things combined, it can cause a really serious issue for the body. I promise I'll get through the depressing information quickly and we'll move on. So really, I'm not going to go through all this stuff. I don't know if you can even see it, but it talks about just all of the industrial compounds, the pesticides, toxic metals. There's just so many things that we're putting into our bodies without thought. One of the biggest ones that we really see and that I talk to people a lot about is just synthetic medications. People think that if they're just going to take a Tylenol or an Advil, it's not a big deal. Your body has to process that. Your liver has to process that. Your kidneys have to process that. So, maybe that's the reality for some people. Our goal is to help them get off of that. But if that's the reality, then we need to support those systems effectively so that they can do their job in a way that isn't interfering with the rest of the systems of our body. So when we think about toxic metals, this is the other thing that I think most people aren't really that aware of. Can you guys see that or not? Dan, you probably can't over here very well. So does that help at all? But these are the ones that most people have been exposed to at some time. So arsenic, mercury, lead, and cadmium. Down here, these are metals that people, if they're going to be exposed to them, they've typically worked with them. And so the smaller ones are the ones that we don't see as commonly are aluminum and nickel, chromium, beryllium and manganese. But people are exposed to that kind of stuff. And so I've done toxic metal testing for people, or heavy metal testing for people. More and more people are having their amalgams removed if they grew up having lots of mercury put into their body or put into their mouth. I mean, all of those things we've seen over time, there's more and more research coming out that those things weren't real positive for us. And so we need to look at that as an effective. Most of us have been exposed to that, so what do we do about it? How do we get that out of our system? And so again, the liver has to process that. Chemical additives in our food sources. How many people think about this? Does anyone really spend a lot of time thinking about it? Probably not. Organic food is so important with that. So when we think about all the chemicals in our food, one is that we think about all of the genetic processing or the genetic GMOs that we're exposed to. When you consume a food that's been genetically modified, it's really tough on your digestive system. And what's happening for more and more Americans is they're developing something that we can basically classify as like being a leaky gut. And what that means is they basically have gaps in between the cells of their digestive organs. And those gaps are allowing different chemicals, different additives, or even genetically modified pieces of DNA into our system, into our bloodstream. And when that's going on, it's really hard for your body to deal with all of that. And so it breaks down the digestive system further and further, and what happens is that all of those particles that are being let into the bloodstream, the liver then has to deal with that. And so that's one reason why people are increasing their levels of toxicity. So that's why the digestive system plays such an essential role with the whole cleansing process. And we're going to go through more of that. If you could cut out one thing that I think a lot of Americans are assuming is okay, but really isn't in terms of toxicity, it's artificial sweeteners. When we think of just the chemical compounds that so many people put into their bodies, that's one thing. If you can cut that out, it's a way to really decrease your toxic load within your body. But you think of all the preservatives, all the insecticides that we've been exposed to over time. But the average American eats approximately 14 pounds of additives every single year. If you ate that in one sitting, you would probably die. But I mean, if you eat as cleanly as you can, it's going to make a difference over time. So obviously we talk a lot about nutrition in the office, and we go through different ideas in terms of changing your nutritional levels. But if you just worked on that one issue, that would make a big impact over time. If that was your goal, I'm just going to make, every choice I make, I'm going to eat as cleanly as I possibly can. So that might mean, I have the option, I can have a bowl of popcorn and I can make that popcorn myself and air pop it, or I could have an energy bar for a snack. Well, the energy bar is going to have a lot more additives, a lot more processing. So if you just think about every single thing you put into your body, I know it seems like a lot, but we all have choices. And you think about each of those choices and really making good choices throughout the year, that will make a huge difference over time. So I won't go through a lot of this stuff, but when we talk about, there's one of the other things that we've really looked at in terms of really increasing toxicity in people's bodies, it's the amounts of mold that are found in food. And that's really scary when you think about it. They're microbial, they're tiny amounts, but they're starting to look at that more and more. Even processed food, basic processed food that we think is okay, little bits of mold that they're finding in these food sources. And so again, look at what you're eating, change that as much as you can. Lifestyle chemicals, alcohol, acetaminophen, all of those things affect the liver. We've got lots of different byproducts in the food preparation process. So when you think about cold cuts and sausages, French fries, things that if we even charbroil a lot of our meats, if we're grilling a lot of the time, doesn't mean that you can't ever grill, but it means that that may not be the best choice to do 5 nights a week, is grill your food, because of the types of chemicals that are created throughout that process.
What's that thing about the peanuts?
So that's again with the mold.
Okay, like peanut butter or just peanuts in
Peanut
general?
butter, peanuts. I thought it was really interesting. I hadn't really read much about it. My brother-in-law is a chiropractor as well, and their whole family stopped eating peanuts and peanut butter. And one of the things that he had researched was that there was a lot, when they make peanut butter, they use some of the worst quality peanuts, and often there's like a mold supply in the peanuts that they're using. So he switched his whole family to sunflower butter, which I tried and initially hated, but now I like it. So it's a process of changing your taste buds over time. So we got rid of the peanut butter in our house, but there's actually a lot of information coming out about things like that. So again, when I talk about this, please don't be overwhelmed. Like Dan came in and said, I'm going to die. You're not going to die. It's that you can really change quality of life over time. And so by looking at these factors, you're not going to notice a difference tomorrow, or you're not going to notice a difference next week. But if you gradually make these changes and really look at your food supply and what you're putting into your body over the next 6 months, over the next 7, 8 months, you're going to notice a big change. So, good question, Todd. Yeah, I apologize. I've got a lot of information on these slides, but a lot of it gets to be too much anyway. So, when we think about this, what happens if you're chronically being exposed to toxins, what the research has shown is that people are more likely to develop autoimmune conditions. They're more likely to obviously impact their general health, but pathological processes within the body. And so when we look at all the chronic diseases and things that people are developing over time, you think about what's happening in our culture. It used to be that, we think about heart disease and we think about cancer. Well, both of those can be created by toxicity within the body. But now we're starting to see more and more autoimmune conditions, more neurological conditions, things like Alzheimer's, dementia, more and more prevalence within our society. So we really want to look at what can we do. This is just a chart, and I don't know if anybody can see that. I apologize, but basically what it's showing is most of us will know someone in our life who's really sensitive to chemicals, and they're often sick all the time. I can think of people that we've worked with over the years that they're sensitive to any kinds of fumes that come from carpets. I mean, they just get really, really sick immediately. They go into a situation where there's maybe some mold in an older building, and all of a sudden, they're like breaking out in hives and they're really sensitive. There's a portion of the population that's very sensitive to chemical exposure, things that most people don't even think about. But what we look at is that in our country, there's a range that we've decided is okay, and it's safe. I wouldn't necessarily say that that's a health-promoting range, but it's what we've determined is we think is okay. And so there's always going to be people that are going to be very, very sensitive to low levels of chemicals, and they're going to have that reaction that's going to be pretty severe. And then there's people who are going to be sensitive even in what is so-called healthy range. And then they get into what the government actually deems as toxic. And that's a really scary range because it's like way over the top. So people will ask us all the time, they'll say, well, I really feel like I've been exposed to heavy metals. But they'll say that they went through testing, and the testing showed that they were in the safe ranges and that they were perfectly fine. What we look at is a range, it's called like a functional range. Meaning it's not the range where someone is full-blown, full of disease, they're having all these severe issues, but in terms of functioning well, they're still not functioning well. They're not functioning in a really healthy range. So we look at that even though a blood test might say, oh, you're okay, you're normal. We still know that that person isn't as healthy as they could be. So what can we do to really optimize what that person is experiencing? So these are just when we look at chronic exposure. People can develop cancer. They can have endocrine and metabolic issues, immune system issues, autoimmune issues, chronic inflammation, neurotoxicity, cognitive and behavioral dysfunction. I look at this a lot. I see people that have a lot of brain fog, or they'll just feel like they have really low energy, they can't make good decisions, they just constantly feel like they're exhausted. Often those people are dealing with real chronic levels of some kind of an exposure to an environmental toxin. So a recent report on the cost to society suggests that between $568 billion to $793 billion is spent per year for environmentally caused disease. So when you think about that, what we're seeing even more is we have to look at the degenerative issues that are happening for people because of that. So again, this is kind of depressing. We'll just move on. But when we think about that, it's again, support your body. And we're going to talk about lots of ways to do that. So how does your body handle detoxification? Is anyone familiar with it at all? Okay. I'm going to just go through it. I'll make this so you can see. There's two different phases. Let's look at color. The left hand isn't going to help me out here, so I'll move out of the way. There's phase 1, and that's not a good one. I think we need new markers, Madison.
We have some new.
Here.
They're in there somewhere.
Okay. Phase 1, phase 2. The liver is responsible, if I stand over here, the liver's pretty much responsible for all the detoxification that happens in the body, but literally every organ system has its own way to detoxify. But the liver is what we're really going to talk about. So what happens is when you have a toxic substance within the body, it's usually fat soluble. It's attached to fat in some way. And so I always think this is really interesting because if anyone's really ever tried to lose weight in the past, they'll notice that often about 2 to 3 weeks after starting a weight loss program that they'll get really sick. And they'll get like a cold or they'll get the flu and the body is detoxifying itself. And the reason that is the body starts to lose fat. There's all kinds of chemicals that are attached to that fat. And so as they start to lose weight, they start to feel kind of ill because their body's trying to get rid of all of this chemical exposure that they've been dealing with for maybe the last 20 or 30 years. But so we start out with fat soluble. But the problem is that our bodies can't get rid of a fat soluble substance. Our kidneys can't deal with something that's fat soluble, and our intestines can't deal with something that's fat soluble. And so what happens is through this phase 1 process, the body has to convert it, the fat soluble substance, into something that's water soluble. Through that, though, I'm going to make this into something that looks scary. You can tell I'm not an artist. Okay, so it has to turn it into something that's water soluble. And through that process, it forms what's called, we're going to call it an active intermediate. Well, basically what that means is it forms this substance that's really toxic through that process. And then our bodies move it into the phase 2 process, which gets it out of the system. So we turn it into something that's water soluble, and then through that process it can get out of the body. But this process and this intermediate, what happens is that if it can't get out of the body, if between phase 1 and phase 2 our body isn't working really very efficiently, this can attach itself to RNA or DNA. So, if it attaches itself, that's like a free radical. So you know when they talk about free radicals or something that can really damage our DNA. We have to work to get that out of our system. And so this is often where people struggle in between this process, is that their body is working so hard, but maybe it's not getting rid of this intermediate like it should, and so people build up a lot of toxicity and damage to their DNA. And so if they're building up a lot of damage to their DNA, any ideas what can happen? Autoimmune issues. We can get a lot of neurotoxicity. People might be, it depends on their genetics as well, but they might be more likely to develop Alzheimer's or dementia.
Extreme aging.
Extreme aging, exactly. That's the way to say it right there. So what we want to do, if you're going to improve this, you have to support these 2 processes. And one of the ways to support phase 2, we'll go into phase 1 and what we're going to do is support it. But phase 2, you want to make sure that you are not constipated. Constipation is like the #1 killer for this whole process. Because if you can't get rid of what your body is really working so hard to get rid of, it's absorbed right back into the bloodstream. And what happens? If it's shut down here, it goes right back up to the liver, and the liver has to start reprocessing everything all over again. So, I probably just went over, we'll see what I did here. Okay. So one of the things that we really, and I'll just go through this instead of using the slides. Okay. So one of the things that you want to do, this process up here, the phase 1 process, uses something called cytochrome P450. Really what that is and what we're talking about is your body needs a lot of antioxidants in order for phase 1 to work appropriately. So how do you get antioxidants in your system? Any ideas? What are antioxidants found in? When you think about that.
Fish oil,
Yeah, there's
for
one.
supplements, but also foods.
Food.
Like salmon.
And you, for food, you really want to think about berries, dark leafy greens. You want to think about having some kind of like a dark leafy green salad every single day. How do you get that into your diet? I always recommend it. Try to do it at lunch and be done with it. So you know when you get home, you're done. These are things I've learned over the years. People are going to be less likely to eat it at night. But do whatever you can to have that really, the darker the green, the more antioxidant rich it is. So kale. But if you just get even a box of organic mixed greens and make it your goal that you're going to, every couple days, you're going to eat everything that's in that box. And so there's some things that you can do like that. But putting a lot of like berries, put them into your morning, like raspberries and blueberries and blackberries into your diet. So one of the other things you can do, and people always think that this is kind of odd, but most people have heard of having a cup of hot water in the morning with lemon in it. It's a great way to support phase 1. And it will also increase the alkaline levels within the body, which we really want to do. So start out your day like that. But overall, if you're really wanting to work on this, I think people should really be working on detoxification every day. We need to support our body every day with some type of form of detoxification. Which, when you think about what I'm talking about, there's a lot of reasons that you should have a dark green leafy salad every single day. There's a lot of reasons for that. There's a lot of reasons to include vegetables. There's a lot of reasons to include berries within your diet. But that you want to just think about antioxidant-rich foods. And so what we use all the time as well is I'm a big proponent of having some kind of a green food within your diet. Most people can't get enough greens. They could try to eat greens all day long, and it's difficult for most people. So this is a great support as well. It's already broken down. Your body doesn't have to do anything, but it supports this process. And so you think about that phase 1. You want that to work really well. We want to get this active intermediate process down into water soluble, out of the system, through the kidneys, and through the bowels. So that's one of the ways that you can really support this. Phase 2 is supported by lots of enzymes, by lots of cofactors. And so if we go back to that, I can never remember exactly all of the names of these, but I'll get it for you. I'm not helping myself. Is it making sense though so far?
Mhm.
Okay. So we look at this. This is all the processes that is happening in phase 2. Sulfation, amino acid conjugation, glutathione conjugation, and acetyltransferase. So basically what we're doing is we want to support that process of converting into water soluble. My fancy slides aren't working for me. So through that, one of the reasons that this breaks down, so we talked about that, there's a couple different things that can happen. One is that people are exposed to so many toxins that the system is completely overwhelmed, and eventually it starts to shut down as it becomes overworked. Other things that can happen that really affect this is if you have a leaky gut. And your gut is basically letting in all kinds of extra toxins. Your body is having allergic reactions to foods that you're eating. What will happen is, again, it basically creates an overload for the liver, and the liver has to process more and more. And so you start to shut down the phase 1 even further. But other things that can happen, we talked about constipation. People aren't getting rid of what they need to, or people's kidneys aren't working the way that they need to. And so phase 2 starts to shut down. So one of the things that we talk about, again, and I'm going to go into this, is supporting phase 1 and phase 2. We talked about antioxidants for phase 1. Phase 2 needs to be done through a diet that's really rich in fiber. This is the process of actually elimination. You want to support your kidneys, you want to support your large intestine. And so through that, one of the things that I recommend, and I'm gonna give you a whole bunch of different ideas. and I should mention this quickly. Substances, so xenobiotics. When you think about that, what we're talking about with xenobiotics is all of the things that we're creating as a culture. So when you think of antibiotics, when you think of things like BPA, all of the chemicals that are found within different plastics in our food sources, that's what a xenobiotic is. Drugs, even nutrients, so grapefruit, oddly enough, can inhibit the phase 1 process. So that's one of the few foods that actually can, but that just me, all I'm saying is that don't eat grapefruit every day. You can have it sometimes, just don't eat it every day. So what happens is that if phase 1 is really starting to shut down, people start to store, again, more and more toxins in their fatty tissue. And so the other system that is affected besides the fat in the body is our brain and our spinal cord. And so when you think about that brain fog, if you've got a lot of this happening on a daily basis, or your system isn't cleansing itself as efficiently as it should, you end up with a lot of toxicity within the brain. Go ahead, Christine.
So if you have, say you get through phase 1 and you have your active intermediates,
Right.
and for some reason you don't go to phase 2, they can turn into free radical, but do they stay as an active intermediate until they're able to go to phase 2? Or they go back to the liver and become fat? So like what?
So where does it, so it happens in a combination. A lot of it ends up being stored in the fat, but because it basically becomes an inert substance in the fat. If it goes back into the liver, then you're again producing more active intermediates.
So if you were to detox again, those inert things within your fat, would they be able to be eliminated?
Eventually, yes. If you keep working on it, so one of the things, if you're really actively pursuing detox, there's basically 2 different forms that I think people should be doing. I think you should be doing detoxification every day. That's your basic stuff, and we'll talk about it in a minute, but you can do something called skin brushing and try to get toxins out of your skin, basically, is what you're doing with that, and increasing blood flow. But you want to also support with just the foods that you're eating an antioxidant-rich diet, making sure that you're having a bowel movement at least once a day. So those are the basic things that you should be doing on a daily basis. What I also recommend is a couple times a year, people do basically a heavier cleanse process. And I'm not saying for like a month. I'm not saying that, I think you should fast for a month and live off nothing. It's not going to happen for most people. And it's really hard to live your daily life and do something like that. But like a 10-day process. And so I'll talk about that. But that is one process that will actually draw a lot of those substances out of the fat cells and get them out of the body. So, good, really, really good question. So when we talk about that, one of the things that people will often say to me is, again, the major form of cleansing that I hear about is that people stop eating for like a week. And one of the things that's such a problem with that is that phase 2 is really dependent on energy. And so if you aren't fueling your body at all, what happens is it shuts down. I've talked to so many people that have cleansed in the past, and what they'll say to me is that I didn't have a bowel movement for like 4 days. Well, not a healthy thing at all. If you're cleansing, it's defeating the purpose. You're actually making it worse. And so you want to be able to supply that phase 2 process. So phase 2 enzymes, when we talked about, I gave you all those fancy names of what's happening within the body, all those processes that are happening within the body. Those are supported by phase 2 enzymes. And so a lot of them are found in fruits and vegetables, spices and herbs. So we want to have a diet that's rich in those things. And I'm going to go through those nutrients in just a minute. And so again, because it's so energy dependent and you have to have a great nutritional status, if you're not eating anything, the whole process shuts down. And if you're not eating appropriately, the process shuts down. Or if you're consuming a lot of really highly processed foods and your liver and your digestive tract are trying to deal with that, it's going to make the job that much more complex. And so we really want to eliminate as many factors as we can that are harmful to that so that we can make it simple, make it as simple as possible. So when we talk about phase 1, phase 1 is dependent, we talked about cytochrome P450. What that means is that these are the nutrients that allow our body to produce cytochrome P450. And so riboflavin, or vitamin B2, niacin, vitamin B6, folic acid, you're going to notice a lot of B vitamins here, vitamin B12, glutathione. So as we go through this, one thing you'll notice, this is the other thing, I think B complex is really supportive for your liver. It's really supportive for a multitude of functions. If people have a lot of stress within their life, I like them to have a B complex. But that's something that people should be consuming, again, on a daily basis. So you want to support that as much as possible. For phase 2, we need ATP. Basically what that means is energy. Glutathione, lysine, taurine. So you're going to see a lot of amino acids through this process. N-acetylcysteine, methionine. There's a lot of things that we actually are typically deficient on if you're not specifically supplying the body for that. So we talked about impaired detoxification. People have too much within their system. They're overwhelming the system. They have impaired excretion. So one of the other ways that you could have impaired excretion besides, your liver or your bowels not working effectively is if you're covering up your skin with all kinds of chemicals on a daily basis. So again, look at what you're putting on your skin. People will ask a lot of the time what we should use. Coconut oil actually works pretty well if your skin is pretty dry. Using substances that are food grade actually work really well to moisturize your skin. So like grapeseed oil, or you could use vitamin E oil, coconut oil, so things like that are food quality. So if you have inefficient fuels, if you don't have enough antioxidants, if you're not eating the right things, if you're not consuming the right foods, and then you have a deficiency of detoxifying substances, again, all the antioxidants, the amino acids that we just talked about. So what do people feel like? Any ideas of what do people feel like if they're really toxic?
Tired.
Yeah. They feel tired a lot. So we talked about the brain fog. They often deal with a lot of fatigue, depression, anxiety, mood swings, cognitive dysfunction. I know when, I think it was probably about 3 years ago, my dad did a big detox, and I mean it was intense. It was not just the 10-day detox that I typically have people do. It was using those types of products but doing it for about 3 months. And literally everyone around him thought he was going crazy because he had a lot of heavy metals that he had to get out of his system. He'd worked in industrial engineering for years. And so through that process, he tasted metal in his mouth. I mean, literally for day after day after day. But it affected his mood. But the great thing was when he was done, is he could think more clearly, he had more energy, he slept better, his mood was better. It was incredible, the transformation. I don't typically recommend that someone do something that intense. If they do, I work with them really closely. And even if we're going to do a 10-day detox, I work with someone pretty closely. I want to know what you're going through. But it's a lot in order to change that. But it's really exciting as it happens for people. But the other thing, this is a good one that I should just cover, marked sensitivity to environmental chemicals. If they're really sensitive to perfume, if you're really sensitive to some people can literally smell someone way across the room if they're wearing a lot of perfume because they're really sensitive to it. Different medications, if they're really sensitive to nutritional supplements. Often for those people, we'll say the typical dose is to take like two scoops of like a product that I'm going to talk about in a second. But you could take 2 scoops of it. For some of these people, they have to start out with a teaspoon. They've got so much, they're so sensitive, but also they have so much toxicity within their system. They start out with a teaspoon, eventually we build up to a tablespoon, whatever they can do to really get that into their body. Some people will get a lot of headaches. They'll have muscle aching and weakness. They might have paresthesias. They might have numbness in their hand or numbness in their foot, something like that going on. Recurrent infections, in really severe cases we've dealt with infertility. So this is what you'll see a lot, and we see this is the main one that I'll often work with, fibromyalgia. I think that diagnosis, I think there's a lot of underlying causes of what's actually happening for someone. Chronic fatigue syndrome, again, chemical sensitivity, allergies, asthma, atherosclerosis, and cancer. A lot of inflammation within the body is created by toxicity. But if we look at it overall, autism, I've worked with a lot of kids that we've needed to do detoxification with. Autoimmune system issues, inflammatory bowel disease, hypothyroid, so endocrine issues, reproductive issues. So even if people are having chronic eczema, why are they having chronic eczema? What's actually going on within their system that's not allowing things to clear appropriately? So if you're going to detox, what do you eat? Any ideas? Antioxidants, antioxidants, antioxidants. So you fuel your body as much as you can. So when we think about that, there are some people that need to go on what's called an elimination diet. So we cut out what are the major causes of inflammation and toxic exposure. Sugar, exactly. Any refined sugar typically needs to be cut out. But then people will say, well, how do I cut out sugar? I'm completely addicted to it. People that are really toxic are completely addicted to sugar. And so one of the things that you have to do is if they can go through this process, and sometimes it's such a mental process of saying, I'm going to completely cut out all of these things for 10 days. What will happen is that they no longer crave those foods when they go back to eating normally again, or what they think is normal for them. And a lot of those things don't taste good to them anymore. That's always really cool when that happens. So if you are really addicted to sugar, cleansing is a great thing to do. If people have an IgE allergy, what that means, an IgE allergy is if someone has, like, if they have a peanut and they break out in hives, that's an IgE allergy. You need to completely eliminate those things, obviously. But some people are allergic to things that they just think, well, I can kind of have it every once in a while, it's not a big deal. If you're going to truly cleanse, you need to completely cut that out of your system, completely cut it out of your diet. We started to do a lot of IgG testing for people as well, which are delayed sensitivity reactions, meaning they might be causing constipation for someone. And so we need to figure out what they're actually being exposed to. What are they actually allergic to, or what is their body not agreeing with that they're eating? But those things need to be eliminated as well. If you're going to stop that leaky gut syndrome, we need to get that diet to be as clean for that individual as it possibly can be. So we avoid food allergies, and especially while we're doing the cleanse, again, you eat as cleanly as you possibly can. Avoid processed foods because they contain additives and they're contributing to that toxic load. So what does that look like? I've got it in here, and I've got a list of things that people can really work on avoiding. But typically, what it looks like is no dairy, eventually no gluten, no sugar. I promise it's way better than what I'm describing because it sounds scary to most people. But if you cut out those things through the cleansing process, typically when you add them back in, you'll see how they really make you feel. But a lot of people will just permanently eliminate them from their diet as they go through this process. But you don't have to. Everybody's different. So again, why do we just not eat? When you start to break down fat, it can overload the toxins in your body, or overload liver function even more. Not a positive thing. If you have a lack of fiber, you're not getting rid of what you need to. And if you're not eating the amount of calories that your body needs, again, that whole process is energy dependent. So everything starts to shut down if you're not getting the nutrients that you need. Yes, I'll go through that later. So this is what, if we're going to do an intense cleanse, this is what I typically will have people do, is 2 jugs of this for 10 days. And what this is they'll start out with, basically the first day, they just start to really pay attention to their diet. So it's really food dependent. They're going to eat as cleanly as they possibly can. The second day, they add a couple scoops of this. The third day, they add 4 scoops of it. And they stay on that for a period of time and eventually ramp it up a little bit. One of the things that I just wanted to, the reason why I do this class in the spring is that, or as we start, it's really not spring right now, but as we approach spring, is that spring is the best time to cleanse your body. If you think of the cycles that happen within nature, spring is a time of renewal, it's a time of cleansing. If you think of Chinese medicine, spring is always the time to clean the liver, to clean out the liver, basically. And so when people go into the spring, liver function is really amped up. Any ideas what emotion that brings about? Anger. Big time. I always notice it in the spring. There are some days when Scott is like, oh, be prepared. It's a liver cleansing day. And people are, they've got a lot of anger, they've got a lot of frustration, they're clearing it out of their system. And so that happens in the spring. So the spring is the perfect time to support the liver in getting those substances out of the body. So one of the things that you do is if you really plan a 10-day cleanse, what I like about that is it's enough time to truly get into deep levels of cleansing, but it's not overwhelming to most people. And what happens is typically the first couple days, they feel kind of miserable. They'll call me and they'll say, is it normal that the top of my head is really sore and I feel kind of achy and I feel really tired? But what happens is as their body starts to rev up that cleansing process and really get to deep levels, they start to have energy again, they'll start to think very clearly, and often through that process they'll start to lose weight. So they'll start to feel really good as they go through that. But it's a great feeling as Scott and I do this at least, we typically do it 3 times a year. But most people, if we can do it 2 times a year, can make a huge difference. But that's the process that they go through, and so there is no fasting. You support the body in order to cleanse versus taking away nutrients to cleanse. And so that's one thing. If you have questions about it, let me know. I've got samples of Ultra Clear Renew, and I've got an actual brochure that shows you step by step the process that you go through in order to do a cleanse like that. But other things that you do to support cleansing are you get adjusted. So when you think of the nervous system, I don't know if you guys can you guys see this? Scott made a nice little slide for me there, so I'm not that high tech. I don't know how to do that, but anyway, what this slide shows is that the nervous system is basically the center of your body's function. If your nervous system is functioning really well, and you're exercising and you're supporting your body in other ways like eating well, and you're resting and you're sleeping and you've got a great attitude, if all of those things are working in conjunction, it's going to enhance your body's cleansing process. Literally, each adjustment cleanses your body. There are times when people will say, I felt really achy after an adjustment, or we'll recommend doing an Epsom salt bath because we can literally feel toxins coming into the connective tissue. So when someone's getting adjusted, what we'll often feel, if their body's in the midst of this, it sounds kind of weird, but the connective tissue will feel kind of slimy. It's the body getting rid of different things, and so it typically kind of reaching a new level of cleansing. And often what the practice member will feel is some achiness, or they'll feel kind of tired. It's a great thing to go through, but it really pushes the body forward. So it's something that, if you just think about that, and your adjustments really supporting that process. Other things you need to do. I gave you a handout on this so that you can pay attention to it. You need to drink enough water on a daily basis. And so with enough water consumption, you want to think of half your body weight in ounces as your minimum. If you're going to do a process like the Ultra Clear Renew for a couple weeks, you ramp that up even higher. Probably 4 to 5 glasses more than that every single day. But on a daily basis, this is your minimum, is half your body weight in water. You consume as many antioxidants as you can to support that phase 1 process of detoxification. You can try a modified elimination diet, which means you're gonna get out all kinds of refined foods out of your system. You're gonna eat as few processed foods. If it comes in a box, if it comes in something that you can just microwave, get rid of it. Take it out of your diet. Avoid genetically modified foods. So when you think of that, those are going to be anything that's in soy or corn and it's not organic. So any processed food is typically going to have that, and so you avoid that. If you really want to take that in the next step, I would love it if you look at trying to cut out dairy. Eventually trying to cut out gluten. Go through the steps of cutting out foods that cause inflammation within the body and that can cause toxicity within your system. But again, and if you need help with that, we will do as much as we can to support you with that, with resources, with information, so that you feel supported through that. Because that's a lot, that's a big step to go through for most people if they're not familiar with those things. But we'll help you with that, and just ask. Just ask us and we'll try to give you information. B complex is incredibly helpful. Yeah, go ahead, Tom.
The water thing's kind of hard because how it kind of dilutes stomach acid. So if I'm eating small meals throughout the day,
Yes.
I'm either having to drink a ton of water in the morning before I eat,
Yeah.
or it just like makes digestion that much harder if I'm drinking throughout the day and I still have food in there, It
Yeah.
kind of.
So Todd brings up a really good point. In order to have the best digestion possible, or if you're really stressed, which most Americans are, you don't want to drink water with your meals. And so the only thing you want to drink with your meals is like herbal tea, or at least add lemon to your water with your meal. And that will help change, basically you're changing that pH, and so that your digestion can work more optimally. So it is hard. You want to drink a lot of water when you first get up in the day. Get up in the morning, you drink as much as you can. But you're right, you want to drink as much as you can about a half hour before eating or a half hour after eating. But again, put lemon in your water, and that's one way you can consume it with your meal, and it shouldn't cause digestive upset for most people.
And enzymes too?
Enzymes, yeah. You can use enzymes. Good question, or good comment on that. So hot lemon water, organic washed lemon, and organic food as much as you can. So when you think of like your meat sources, I know organic meat is expensive, but when you think about that, it's not pumped with antibiotics, it's not pumped with hormones, and so you're giving your body less, you're basically decreasing your toxic load over time. This is the other one that if you've been to my hormone class, I talk about this all the time, apples, beets, and carrots. So apples, the reason why I have you eat at least half an apple every single day is there's malic acid in an apple that keeps bile moving. So when you think of the liver and the gallbladder work hand in hand. And so you want to keep that bile flow really clean, and you want to keep it moving through the body. Apples support that process. Beets have something called betaine in them. It assists phase 1 and phase 2 of the cleansing process. So it's not like a ton of beets. I always get the look of, seriously, I'm not eating beets. They're really good for you. Eat a third of a cup of beets every day. It's not a lot, but that's enough to get you the proper levels of betaine to actually support the process. So eat beets. If you can, I know at Vitamin Cottage they have them all year round. Yeah, and you're looking at me like, no, I'm not eating beets. Come on. And I always give the warning, it will turn your urine and it will turn your bowel movement red. Don't be afraid of it. It's okay. There's nothing scary that's happened to you. So, and carrots. So about a handful of baby carrots or one big carrot every single day. But those nutrients, the vitamin A in carrots is great for liver function. But I am amazed when I am dealing with someone that says I'm really constipated, this is what we'll often turn to immediately. And it really supports the liver, it supports the gallbladder, it supports the colon.
What did you say the bile does?
So with the bile, your bile has to work in conjunction in the cleansing process. And so what will happen if people are really toxic, their bile becomes like thick and pasty. It's kind of gross. And so that's a really tough process for it affects their digestion. It can cause a lot of acid reflux and indigestion, but it also can just make someone absolutely miserable and exhausted. And so if we really work with the apples, it supports the gallbladder as well as the liver. Any questions on that?
You have to eat beets raw.
No. Good question. Thank you. What I suggest is either cooking them in a pressure cooker, you can steam them, or you can actually roast them with a little bit of olive oil and maybe some sea salt. But that's something, and you don't want to eat the peel of the beet or you do want to peel them. But you can roast them with the skin. You can roast them with the skin on, and then just peel off the skin as soon as they come out of the oven. Good question, Yvette. Thank you for clarifying that. One of the things when people have a lot of toxicity, vegetables will often taste really bad to them. And so eat as many steamed vegetables as you can, or steam your vegetables. Eventually, as your pH starts to change and we start to move into more basic pH, or be more alkaline, which we want, vegetables will start to taste better. But start out with as many steamed vegetables as you need to, and then gradually convert over to having more raw vegetables. So it's just something that you can work on through the process. Work on your level of stress. Easier said than done. But it can make a huge difference. So your adjustments will work with your stress relief. Deep breathing is huge. So set reminders at work to do deep breathing. 8 to 10 breaths. Several times a day. In through the nose, out through the mouth. But that will help start to cleanse your system. Exercise. You got to have movement. If you're sitting at a desk all day, even if you can get up and walk, it will make a huge difference. But especially if you're gonna do the ultra clear renew and you're really gonna go for cleansing, awesome. But one of the things that will do is it's gonna kind of tax your system in a way for a period of time. So that's not the time when you're gonna go and do hour-long workouts, or you're gonna go run on a treadmill. You're gonna take it easy during that time, and maybe you're just gonna go on a 30-minute walk. But you're going to be a little bit gentler with your body at that time, or do some yoga poses or something like that. And then skin brush. Is anyone familiar with that? Yeah, so I should have brought mine. I really meant to. But it looks like it's a really coarse bristle brush. And basically what you do is you go in circular motions, starting at your feet and your ankles, and take that brush and go in circular motions, and literally you're just brushing your skin. And what that does is it really encourages the flow of the lymphatic fluid through your system. And so that will basically take up particles that then have to, again, be processed within the liver. So if we get that lymphatic flow going really nicely, it helps our liver, kind of pushes everything through our system. So that's something that you can do. You basically want to do that either at the beginning or the end of the day, right before like a shower, you know, and it will increase that circulation. Go ahead, Tim.
I had one and the bristles were actually too rough. It was,
Okay.
and so
You gotta be gentle.
I exchanged it for one
Yeah.
with a little softer, so like I know at Vitamin
Yeah.
Cottage, they usually have both of them
side
on
by
the same
side.
rack, and I just
Yeah.
try and find what seems like it'd be comfortable but still
Yeah.
get the job done.
There you go. So you just want to be, yeah, you don't want to, they're pretty tough. I mean, but they can make a big difference. So you don't have to get one with a really coarse bristle, but they are basically a coarse kind of a thing to do. So work on cleansing daily through nutrition. Work on your breathing. Work on try skin brushing. Simple thing to do. Exercise. Get adjusted. Eventually, if you really want to do it, then you do your 10-day cleanse 1 to 2 times a year. And the other thing is about that. What I love about this, I've worked with a lot of different products over the years. The Ultra Clear Renew addresses pH. It helps the body become more alkaline. It addresses heavy metal toxicity. So please know that if you taste metal through the process, it's a good thing. It isn't real pleasant, but it really is getting the heavy metals out of your system. It upregulates both phase 1 and phase 2 of detoxification. So there's lots of things that you can do through that process. And if you have questions, let me know. Because when I've gone through this, I just went through a lot of really generalized information. Often we need to tailor programs for each individual depending on what you've been exposed to, how stressful your life is, what your diet is like. If you've got different food allergies, there's lots of things to put into that equation. So if you have questions about it or if it's something that you really want to work on, let me know. You know, I typically don't let just anyone buy this. Usually the front desk staff will send me a message of, this person wants to buy it, is it okay? Typically it is okay, but we want to make sure that their body is in a good state before they're going to do that. Because you want to do it in a safe way, and you want to do it in you want it to be really effective. So what I have, I've given you handouts, but if anyone wants to try this, I have samples of it. And then I also have the brochures so that if you want to find out, I think there's 9 of these in here that are left. But if you want to find out what the protocol looks like, because I'll have people, you got to plan for it. If you're going to do something like this, you want to do it at a time when maybe you're not traveling across the country. You know that you have a couple weeks that are going to be a little bit more low-key, and that you can spend some extra time to get adequate rest, to make sure you're getting enough water, to make sure you're getting enough vegetables, to make sure, I've had clients that say, well, whenever I travel, I get constipated. Not the time to do it. So you want to make sure these things are working really well before it's something that you embark on. But we want to support you through that process. I'll typically have people email me. I want updates on what's going on with them. How are you feeling? How's your elimination? Don't feel weird about talking to me about things like that. I'm used to it. So we go through all of that. There's sometimes that we need to look at food allergies before we get into it, or support the digestive system before we get into it. So you want to really feel like your body needs to be well supported through the process, and we want to do it right. So any questions that I can answer?
Not yet.
Okay.
What if you don't like lemon?
If you don't like lemon, basically there are other ways to support your body. You don't have to do hot water and lemon every morning. So your form of detoxification in the morning might be you make a shake and you put a ton of blackberries in it, or you put a lot of blueberries in it.
Okay.
With that combination, if you're really going to refine it, don't buy the mixed berries that have the strawberries with like blackberries and blueberries and raspberries. So your strawberries are more acidic. Your other berries, the blackberries and blueberries and raspberries, are basic. So you don't want to combine them. So just another thing. But then there's other things that you can do. You can put kale. You can put dark leafy greens within your shake. Promise, it's really not that bad. But there's all kinds of things that you can do. But experiment with it, yeah.
How does spinach compare to kale?
Spinach is, kale is a little bit stronger in the antioxidant profile, but spinach is still great. And if, you know, I don't really like kale, but I put it in a lot of soups. So, you know, there's ways that we use it that are a little bit less pungent, I guess. A little bit easier to break down, but that's what we do with it.
So if I substitute spinach, I'm not really sacrificing much.
If you could, yeah, really, I mean, there's ways that you can do it, like put it in a shake or put it in a soup, you know. Try to buy a little bit of kale here and there and try it. But if you really hate it, then add extra spinach.
Okay.
Yeah.
I love putting the mad greens in like smoothie because I can't handle it on my own
Yeah.
in like water.
Yeah.
So I just get like a really power packed smoothie each morning.
Yeah, I think we talked about it at the Health Style Challenge that we did this fall, but that's something that I typically will consume every day, is I will take a scoop of the dynamic greens, I'll put it in a little bit of coconut or almond milk, and then I'll add a whole bunch of frozen blueberries, about half a banana, and often I switch out different forms of protein powders, but I'll use like brown rice protein, or use pea protein, which is kind of interesting, or whey protein, and make a shake out of that. And it's just so full of nutrients, and it makes you feel so good. But there's things like that. Those are great things that you can just do this as it's a daily support for your body. You know, when we do these series of classes, there's all kinds of different topics to go through. But you'll notice that a lot of the recommendations are the same, because all of these things support so many systems of the body. If you're working on heart health, if you're working on autoimmune issues, if you're working on digestive health, you need to support your body in all of these ways. But when you talk about cleansing, the apples, the beets, and the carrots, or I've had people say, well, I just won't eat beets. Okay, well, at least do the apples and the carrots. You know, do as much as you can and plan it. I think the biggest successes that I see are when people take the time to just sit down for like half an hour each week and say, these are the meals that I want to cook. These are the nutrients I want to get into my body. This is how I'm going to do it. And they create a plan. And it's written down. Maybe it doesn't have to look like this huge plan, but it's little notes here and there. You know, in our house, it's a little notebook that sits on the counter, and there's a grocery list, and there's a meal list with the pages of the cookbooks that I'm going to be using. And it's all set up, so it's really simple. And I don't have to think about it. So, any other questions? Go ahead, Del.
Yeah, my question's on kidneys. You didn't mention too much about how to support the kidneys in the cleansing process.
Good question.
That kind of stuff.
So the kidneys are more difficult to support. The best way to support the kidneys is to basically decrease toxic load throughout the entire body. Because the better the liver is working, the less the kidneys have to actually work to get rid of them. I mean, everything's like water soluble, ready to get out. So when you think about that, the main thing is that the kidneys are working well. You know, if someone's like going through dialysis or their renal function has been suffering for a period of time, at that point it's really difficult. You know, there's not a lot that you can really do at that time. So what do? You have to decrease toxic load.